maybe I'll try to address your question. ECRI's approach to integration is a mutual process of recognition involving all of society, both the majority and various minorities. And of course, the EU has common basic principles on immigrant integration. If you want, I just wrote a book on integration. We can talk about it for several days if you like. Yes, of course, language is very important. And language, if people do not acquire the language, the national language, they have a very difficult time of participating fully in society. And this is why, for example, language requirements for citizenship are a standard practice throughout Europe. The core issue is about the proportionality of the demands. Are they reasonable? Is there a good, sound basis for them? And the methods for achieving language knowledge. Of course, the menu of policy options usually includes, it's pretty limited. It's carrots, sticks, and sermons. Sermons usually don't work. So usually the policy mix is between carrots and sticks. ECRI supports carrots. ECRI supports helping people, providing opportunities, providing positive incentives for them to learn the language. Because once you get into punishments, sometimes you get into human rights problems. Sometimes you get very tricky issues of proportionality. You have stigmatization of groups and so on. So of course language is important. Of course it's also very good if the majority knows minority languages and supports them. But it's clear for minorities and immigrants of various kinds to participate fully in society, to interact with others, that knowledge of the national language is absolutely critical. But very often they can only do that if they are provided a helping hand by the majority population and given assistance in learning that language. Of course, they have responsibilities to do it themselves, but so much depends on the methods used and the proportionality of the measures involved.
I would just like to add one point that you made, that there's also a question whether the majority should learn the language of the minority. We have had several cases where people are turning to us and raising the question whether, for example, in certain public services like rescue service, also whether the personnel of the hospitals, whether they should have the minimum command of Russian. And whether, for example, and we have looked into that, whether Commissioner can at all, do we have a legal basis to refer to a concrete norm where I can say that yes, this or other person has this obligation. I would say that right now it is not regulated in Estonia. It is more of the, I would say, it comes from the common sense that people working at this picking the phone at the rescue service, they don't have to have only a command of minorities, but also in English, etc. So I guess there will be more of these issues debated in the near future.
I'm Kati Viik from the Estonian Ministry of Social Affairs, the head of the Gender Equality Department. And I would also So I would also like to thank both of you for very exciting presentations, but now I specifically have a question to Niels. I understand that well, your job is to deal with problems, but I was wondering, in this background of all those challenges, that do you see any positive trends at all, or any positive signs in Europe? Thanks.
Yes, of course. And our job is to engage, not only to criticize governments, but to help and to provide examples of best practice, both in terms of legislation and in terms of policies. And this is also what our general policy recommendations are based on. They're based on compiling best practices and saying, if you want to know how to approach a certain issue, look at this. This is based on a vast amount of research, consultations with NGOs all over Europe. You want best practice? Here it is, and we can point to good examples. I think actually Europe has come a long ways in terms of dealing with these issues. And some of it has to do not so much with the Council of Europe, but with the European Union as well. If you look at the case law in the European Court of Human Rights, it was very bleak or very scanty until a couple of years ago. So the case law on anti-discrimination and the ratification of Protocol 12 has made a big difference, I think. And so I think at the legal level, both in the Council of Europe and with the European Union, with the anti-discrimination directives, there's been huge progress in terms of the legal standards. There's been the fact that now we have countries are required to have equality bodies dealing with these issues in the European Union. I think is a huge step forward. As I said, we're concerned about the weakening of some of these bodies in Europe because of the crisis and various other reasons, but I think that's a huge step forward. I think the attention given to the issue of Roma in Europe, if you remember 10, 15 years ago, it wasn't an issue. It wasn't an issue on the European agenda. It became an issue after the accession of Central and Eastern Europe. And I think that the progress, despite the difficulties of Roma integration, there's been huge steps forward in awareness raising and in getting governments to take this issue seriously. So I think and also in terms of NGOs, now the amount of funding from various programs, the EU and elsewhere, to fund activities such as this today, I think this did not exist 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So I think there are good examples, and I said it's not a unilinear trend with right-wing populist parties either. Some of them make progress and then they disappear and get voted out of office, and I'm quite happy that happens as well. So I think it's a mixed picture, but the crisis clearly complicates our work. Clearly complicates our work, both in terms of budgets for the vulnerable groups, for the equality bodies, but in terms of attitudes as well. When times are tough, people get very protective and inward-looking. For example, work we just did on Latvia shows that during the period of economic growth, the labor market had a hugely integrated role from 2002 to 2007. That people who spoke poor Latvian were hired by employers, they learned Latvian on the job, they interacted with Latvians, and the labor market was a major motor of integration. Of course, when the crisis hit, we had the reverse process. People were fired, so on and so forth. So the economic crisis makes our job very difficult, and I'm hoping that we're through the worst of it, and that things will look up in the future. But there are success stories as well. As I said, our job is not only to criticize, but to help. We're all in this together, and it's only through cooperative efforts between governments, international organizations, NGOs, civil society, that there will be progress in this. And it's tough. But in general, I'm an optimist. I have to be an optimist if I moved to Latvia from America 17 years ago. I'm genetically an optimist. But there's a whole lot of research that suggests, it's based on the Alport-Gordon's contact hypothesis. Alport-Gordon was the preeminent kind of social psychologist of prejudice in 20th century America. And he put forth the hypothesis that under certain conditions, if people from different cultural backgrounds interact, that changes their values and they become more tolerant. And those conditions are the boss has to support it, you have to have a common goal, no competition, similarities in status, and there's been several hundred pieces of research throughout the world showing that it works. That if people work together in the labor market, in armies of different cultural backgrounds, their values change. So the key thing is to promote this constructive interaction between people in the workplace and elsewhere. And what is a barrier to this? Discrimination. Discrimination creates barriers between people. But we can also, through government policy, promote interaction between people, and which will lead to value change. And the more we do this, I think the better we will be.
Aitäh teile heade ettekannete eest. Mul on küsimus Nilsile. Ma küsin seda sinu käest eesti keeles. Kena on sind teile näha Eestimaal, aga kui sa tõid oma ülevaate nendest rahvusvahelisest organisatsioonidest, mis sa arvad sellest? Millise koha võtab nüüd endale ÜRO Inimõiguste Nõukogu ja oma selle perioodilise aruannete nõudmisega riikidelt. Sellepärast, et Eesti peab esitama oma UPR-i, ütleme niipidi inglise keeles, järgmise aasta veebruaris. Millist rolli sa näed selles? Aitäh!
I'm not an expert on the UN, but ECRI has very good cooperation with CERD, the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, and I'm going to meet with them in February in the next session. And our work, we have a very cooperative relation with the UN agencies, particularly UNHCR on the ground. They're a very good source of information about what's going on the ground. With regard to periodic review, to be honest, I haven't been exposed to the process very much, so I don't feel very confident to comment on it. One thing that I should mention and bemoan is a disconnect between many of the UN mechanisms and European mechanisms, especially in the realm of anti-racism. And because the UN has been working on anti-racism for 30 years. They've had three decades of anti-racism. And part of that disconnect, I think, was deepened by the Durban conference, which of course was very disappointing to many people in Europe and North America dealing with anti-racism. That was used for a platform by various groups to settle accounts of various kinds. And I think that actually led, if you go back and look at the political history of all of this, it actually led to the OSCE assuming a much larger role because America was so angry with Durban that they wanted to push the anti-racist agenda in a European organization in which the United States was a member, which was the OSCE. On the periodic review, sorry, I can't help you too much. UN useful, good cooperation, but unfortunately, because of various historical factors, not a whole lot of connections between the European Union, Council of Europe, OSCE, and the UN, and I think that needs to be addressed.
Mari-Liisile ja aitäh kõigile teistele kõnelejatele. Ja nüüd on foyees lõuna ja ootame teid tagasi kella 9.